You sent me an email about chapter 9. Yeah. And so I started looking at 9 through 11, and I realized that there is 9 through 11. 11 is another prophecy about the Messiah. And there's a lot of things here. And this section between 7 to about 11 to about 12 is really kind of got this tangled weave of information. 7 begins with a prophecy in Ahaz's day about a young maiden that Matthew sees through the Septuagint and pulls forward and says, this virgin shall conceive, is really about the Christ child, and he pulls that forward. But in Isaiah's day, it's about an impending invasion by the northern tribes and their allies against Jerusalem to get them to side with them against the Assyrians. And Ahaz is worried, and he says, I better appeal to the Assyrians for help, my ally. And Isaiah says, no, look, you don't have to. God will take care of this for you, and you ask God for a sign. And he says, I won't ask God for a sign. Oh, I'm too holy to ask God for a sign. And basically, Isaiah says, yeah, okay, whatever. Since you won't ask God for a sign, God's going to give you a sign. This young maiden will give birth to a child, and his name will be Emmanuel. And then when that happens, the 10 northern tribes and their allies will be done away with. Their judgment will come. And so you begin seeing this march through about the prophecy toward the 10 northern tribes and towards towards the Jerusalem and the tribes of Judah. But intermingled in there is this prophecy about this kid named Emmanuel, named Marshal Halishbash. There's several different names in there. Yeah, you try to say that twice and then on 3 times real quick. And so 11 picks up with that. And we could jump from where we were in 9:7, or 9:1 through 7, and jump to 11, and we would lose a lot of ground, and there'd be a lot of things that were lost in there. Or we could cover 9 through 10 to where we know exactly where we were with 11. And so go ahead and flip up the, if you got these, there's nothing magical about the different sides. I mean, the magical thing about mine is I wrote on mine. But I put an NIV on one side, New American Standard on the other. And you may or may not be able to read that. That's why I printed these, so you could. For those of us with fair eyesight enhanced. I put the NIV on one side, New American Standard. Why? Because when we start talking in Isaiah and prophetic conversations, the language in Isaiah possesses some of the most difficult Hebrew in the world to translate. There's some very rough passages in there, very odd verb forms. And so it's very difficult at times for, not for scholars to do it, but for average folks that are in seminary, they get in there and it starts to become problems. And also in Bible translation, the NASB and some of the others are more literal translations, so they're going to maintain some of the wooden structure, where the NIV is going to polish it out. And so you have both there, so as we read the discussion, if something doesn't seem quite clear in the one column, look over at the other. If it still doesn't seem quite clear, you're probably a good question to ask. All right? So let's begin here. Now, I've kind of set the stage. The stage is set. The Assyrians are coming. That's who's coming. The Assyrians are a world empire. They have twice, or will twice, actually, not them. Twice have tried to subjugate this region of the world under their control. Now, why is this region so important? Well, last week we looked at the Way of the Kings, and the Way of the Kings comes down the what we call the Fertile Crescent, comes down through Turkey and down and into Egypt, and it's a vital trade route. It is a route that connects Africa to Asia Minor, and that trade route through land all the way into Europe. It's a vital trade route. A lot of trade goes through the land of Israel. It is a critical point. If you look at the Battle of the Bulge, why did they pick Bastogne to hold the ground there? 5 roads went through Bastogne. Vital place. Gettysburg. Why did the battle start at Gettysburg? It actually started over shoes. I don't know if any of y'all knew that. It started over shoes. The Southern boys didn't have shoes for their feet. Heard there were shoes in town. They went in there. But Gettysburg was a vital point. It had a rail junction, and it had several roads that centered right there. It's vital territory. In vital territory, if you're a major power, you want to control. Because if you control those trade routes to 3 continents by holding a narrow piece of land, you control what? The trade. And you can starve a nation out, or you can reap a great benefit from it. So the Assyrians want this land, and they had great influence in this area. And this is a time where they begin to wane, and so Israel and Ammon and the Philistines and Moab and a few others begin to see an opportunity to raise an army and throw the Assyrians off, and they want Judah to join them. And Judah said no, and that's where the attack is going to come from. And so we have this, and this begins in 9:8. We're going to have the Lord send a message to Jacob, and then in 10, he's going to talk about the Assyrians, who are going to be his tool to punish the 10 northern tribes. The Lord sent a message again to Jacob, or against Jacob, and it falls on Israel, and all the people know it. That is Ephraim and its inhabitants of Samaria, asserting in pride and the arrogance in their heart. Well, what's the charge against the 10 northern tribes? Arrogance and pride. And Elaine brought up a guy by the name of Jonathan Kahn in an email. And I've watched some of his stuff. I haven't seen enough. And he makes some good points. And I think that's a great. I think he makes a great sermon from here about the pride of America. I think so. I think he allegorizes. Being Jewish, Jews, their hermeneutic is more allegory. You go read some of their midrash documents and things like that. There's a lot of allegory in that, and that's Origen kind of carries on that tradition and things like that. And it's not that it's bad. I've seen Paul does allegory. He does a perfect allegory between the bondwoman and the free woman. Great allegory. And so there's nothing wrong with allegory as long as it's done right. And I think he's got some good points that America should pay attention to. For me, sometimes I think he goes a little too far with the allegory. But what I heard from the 45 minutes that I watched, there's some good things in there that I think we ought to pay attention to. Chronicles. Yep. Yep. If my people who are called by my name. Absolutely. And absolutely, and really for. And it was true for Israel. It is, and that's vital for any type of revival. And like he says, is to call upon Christ, who are called upon my name, and repent, and I will heal their land. Now, for us today. Is it the healing of our physical land, or is it the healing of us spiritually? You can take that in several different allegorical ways as well. And so he makes some good indications here, and we'll look at some of that here in a moment. The charge is arrogance. And that was kind of what he's putting forth. The charge against America in his series is the Americans' arrogance against God. And notice what it says. It says, the bricks have fallen down, but we will rebuild with smooth stones. Sycamores have been cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. In their pride and arrogance, which is more costly to build, bricks or hewn stone? Hewn stone is. There's a lot of man hours in fitting a stone, as opposed to making bricks and laying it with mortar. And so what they said is, these things that we had made with bricks, we're so powerful that we will replace it with nicely hewn stone. In a sense, basically, to God, it's pretty arrogant. You may knock our walls down and our brick walls down, but we'll replace them with nicely hewn stone. Now think about that. That's God's children. Imagine your child looking at you and doing that. I have kids. I have seen that look. I was a child and survived, and I've given that look. I had teachers that thought I was going to grow up to be a killer or a priest. I think the jury is still out on that some days. But that's a level of arrogance, is it not? That's kind of above. I mean, you got Muhammad Ali, who was the best boxer, and said it. And then you got people going, hey, God, you can knock down our walls, but when you're done knocking them over, we'll just go over to the quarry and we will make hewn stone. Which one is harder to make, but it's also harder to breach. Think about it. Which is easier to break, a wall made of brick or a wall made of solid stone? Brick. That's some arrogance. You can cut down all of our cypress trees, but we'll replant them with better trees, cedar trees. You go to 1 Kings 10:27, and you see kind of where they get this idea that cedar trees are better than cypress trees, that the king at one time is going to plant so many cedar trees they will be as cheap as cypress trees.
What was that?
2 Kings 10:27. And so that's a level of arrogance towards the one true God, who has made a proclamation against you, who has already told Ahaz, hey, don't worry about these guys. I've gotten it under control. And Ahaz still flips out. Therefore the Lord raises against them adversaries. You'll see this phrase, the Lord raises, the Lord brought. There's another phrase that is going to be in there, is because his anger does not turn away, his hand is still outstretched. There's always a reason when you see phraseology like this within a text. The book of Jonah, in the first chapter, is not translated as good as it should be. When you read the book of Jonah, it says, the Lord called up to Jonah and told Jonah to arise and go up to the city of Nineveh, the great city, arise and go towards it. And then in the Hebrew translation says, and Jonah arose, and that's the last time Jonah arises. And then Jonah went down to Tarshish, which is actually up from Jerusalem, down to the wharf, down to a boat, down into the bows of the ship. The language there is for a reason. It's designed that God has called Jonah to go up, and Jonah has gone away from God as far as he can down away. It's designed to show to the reader the depravity of the man. So you have this going on. The Lord raises up an adversary against him. You're going to see where the Lord is the one that is the active player. While the Assyrians are going to be a rod of his instrument, it is the Lord that is the active player. He is the active agent here. From Rizin, you write in there Assyria. The Spurs of the enemy, the Arameans, the Assyrians are risen. Syria and the Arameans are another name. Eastward to the Philistines on the west, and they devour Israel with gaping jaws. Now, again, this is a time when Israel does not mean the totality of the nation. Israel is the 10 northern tribes. Judah are the 3 southern tribes. Benjamin, Judah, and the Levites. Because there's 3. And a lot of people go, oh, there's only 2. No, there's 3. One is a non-landed tribe. So he's going to bring to them their natural enemies. Well, the Assyrians are coming, and the folks and the Arameans, they're going to side together and are coming against Israel. The Philistines that's odd because they're more down around where Judah is, more to the south. But there was a time when the Philistines broke contact with with Judea, and invaded into the north. And so this is all occurring at the same time. So this is an attack on 3 fronts to destroy this nation. Because of why? That, and then what? Pretty arrogant. They thumbed their nose in the face of God, kind of like Oregon fans against Ohio State. Anyhow, did I say that out loud? I got to quit doing that. Notice this here. And in spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out. What do you think that means? couple of things that can be, say again? More to come. And that's what a lot of people, and that's really where it comes. There's two ways it can look. One of the ways is more in a judicial sense that he's going to continue to judge them. But then a lot of scholars look at it and says there are a lot of, in the ancient Near Eastern world, many kings held a mace in their hand. When you see a lot of their statues, especially in Egypt and up into the Assyrian, they would hold a mace in their right hand. And that was designed to show that if the people got out of line, you either get the carrot or you can get the stick. And what God is saying here is, my anger has not been done away with. I am furious with your behavior. And my hand is still where? Outstretched. I'm sure you've heard parents like that say that, when we get home. And we can finish that sentence right on out, right? Yeah. I used to get pulled out in the parking lot and then come back and go,
My mom just took me out on the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
Closed the door.
Yeah, I used to be quite a prankster. One day in church, I think you've heard this story a few times. If you have, well, I'll tell it again. I got an A in getting kicked out of children's church. I also got an A in detention going in junior high, and so I was part of the course. And so one Sunday I come out, and we had a pastor that would call your parents down from the pulpit. He'd be in the mid-stride of his sermon, and he'd go, "Eddie and Phyllis Payne, your son Ashley is at the back of the auditorium. You may want to go back and police him up."
Thank you very much.
He's like, "Hey, thanks, Pastor, for selling me right on down the river." So I remember this clearly. The pastor was preaching on prayer. And by the way, this is free. So if you're watching this and wondering where I'm going nowhere with this. It's a rabbit that I will shoot quickly. So the guy's talking about prayer. I said about right there. My dad picked me in, and you can tell he's just. And so he grabs me and he starts heading out. And I figured, if you're going to get in trouble, go out with a laugh. And I yell out, because we're talking about prayer, "Pray for me!" To which I got a lot of laughs. And I got a lot of something else when I got to the bathroom. The wrath is outstretched. I am about to smack you down significantly hard, and your response is, whatever you do, we'll rebuild better. That's pretty arrogant. Yet the people do not turn back to him who struck them, nor do they see the Lord of hosts. The Lord cuts off the head and the tails of Israel, both the palm branch and the bulrush, in a single day. The head is the honorable and the elderly man, and the prophet who teaches falsehood is the tail. So I'm going to take out your leadership. I'm going to take out those who are leading you in this direction. In a day, wipe you out. And there's still no change. There's still no change. And you can apply this to the nation today. Look, we've got a lot of folks that are just going in every different direction you can possibly imagine. And think about it. We are embracing all forms of immorality at such a high rate now. I was watching TV last night and we were going, yes, the former Roseanne star Melissa Gilbert and her wife are having their first baby, and the person said it without blinking. And you look at it going, wife? And we've embraced that. It's just normal. It's just normal. It's just normal. Watch ABC TV at times, and you're like going, ugh. I've had to quit watching ABC TV because on Thursday night, 3 of their shows right in a row had odd things going on, and I was like, no, I can't watch that anymore. But yet we've embraced these things at such a great rate. There's a thing on Facebook that says, which is going to be the greatest dilemma for folks embracing this? And a mom who refuses to cut a lesbian's hair, And that's a great conundrum for folks that push that agenda. Because at what point do you back one or the other? Or you have folks that say, well, you know, Islam is just one of many religions and many ways to God. Or this is just another way to reach God. And, you know, you can't judge me for my faith. That's kind of the level of depravity that is being discussed here. When you, who are God's children, essentially stick your tongue out at God and say, what you knock down, I'll put back better. That's a pretty highly arrogant statement. Do you not think? What do you think? We'll stop here for a minute. Or do you want me to keep going?
There's a great cartoon that shows God being down slow.
Yeah. Yeah. You know.
With God's strong right hand, He also slays the enemy.
He does. And we'll see that in chapter 10.
What I think He does is to try to do good things for us, to bring us back into a full relationship with Him.
That's right.
And, you know, sometimes the bad things that happen to us, we learn a whole lot from. I would tell you that the lessons I've learned in the last 6 months are really good lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But the next time I have lessons from God, I just said I didn't have cancer to go along with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everything that's bad that has happened to me in my life, and there have been a number of things over the years, has all been used by God to teach me and to lead me back to Him in a different way.
Well, the drill sergeants in our battalion used to look at the soldiers and say, pain brings a memory. Y'all want to act foolish, and so everybody had to, and they'd say, pain brings a memory. And you'd have a soldier ask what that means. Go, if it hurts bad enough, you'll remember not to do that. Go ahead, Brother Walter.
You're talking about building back stronger.
Yeah.
I think of the Twin Towers.
Uh-huh.
You know, they thought the first Twin Towers would pretty indestructible.
Yeah.
Then they knocked it down, and we came back with built this new building.
Victory Tower.
And but like the glass in the windows are 8 inches thick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want to be on the street when that thing falls.
Get those window washers down.
Yeah.
But that analogy there, that's what came to my mind.
Yeah. And that's usually what happens when people have so...
Funded by the governor
Mm-hmm.
and the mayor and by President Bush.
Yeah.
The 9 and 10.
That's right. And that's what happens when people reach a level of arrogance towards God. They look at the things that God is trying to do, just like a child, and you discipline a child. Rarely is discipline to the child seen as a good thing at the moment you're disciplining the child. Right? The child, I hate you. I wish you were my mommy. You know, my sister used to look at my mom and say, my other mom used to let me do this, and weirded my mom out for a while. I used to just reach over and do this every now and then because I got taller than my mom, and that worked well once. It only takes me more than once to look at a hot pot there, Brother Si.
I don't think there's anything that man can build that will withstand.
No,
forever.
there's nothing.
We can build the biggest,
I'll give you a great example.
we build a tank that's got X amount of armor in the front.
Yep.
Cannot be defeated, but yes, it has.
Yes, it has. Oh, absolutely.
We can build the biggest tower in the world, and guess what? At some point in time, it will fall down.
A ship only God can sink. Iceberg, right ahead. Yeah. Anyhow, now I'm not reliving that movie because I didn't watch it. But you're right, and that's the height of arrogance. Only God can sink this ship. Don't.
God, you can big temples are built.
Yeah.
Beautiful glass from mega churches and beautiful little churches. And guess what? All of them, given enough time, will fall apart.
Absolutely.
Some of them through the own disgrace of the congregation,
Exactly.
and the pastors, of its members. But everything that we do physically will never stand. The
test.
pyramids.
No.
The pyramids are degrading every
And they used to be covered with beautiful marble on the outside, and it was all taken.
Down to to bear stones.
Yeah. St. Mark's Cathedral, probably aesthetically inside one of the most beautiful cathedrals I've been in, is slowly sinking into the Adriatic Sea. Venice is slowly sinking underwater. Every year it floods more and more every year. And this cathedral itself, when I was there last year I was there, twice it was under 4 feet of water from the canals. Every great monument that man has built to himself has gone the way of the dodo. Our great monuments of our nation, all these things, we are on a ticking clock. And so for us to be so arrogant to say, what I build is somehow greater than what God can build or what God can do, and therefore I don't need God. I, in my own power, with my own army, with my own navy, with my own finances, I don't need God because I can provide with my own right hand. And for a while you can. Absolutely. But eventually, that outstretched hand of God is going to come along just like a well-placed blow from a parent. And initially, and this isn't the first time that the 10 northern tribes have been whacked. They got whacked early on. Assyria came down and messed with them, and then they were a vassal state for them. And instead of learning their lesson, they said, "Well, we'll go kick a hornet's nest again. That was so much fun the first time." Except this time the hornet's nest is bigger than they realize, and it swarms them. Wipes them out. And so the pride and arrogance, and we see this amongst our nation today, we see this over in Europe. We have no need of God. God is the opiate of the people. God is a fairy tale we tell children. God is, the Christianity is a bunch of hooey, and there is no God. To look at the world that exists and say that there was nothing there that created it is really the height of arrogance. I mean, like my youngest look at me and say, "Dad, I don't need you in my life. I don't need you to provide for me." And you look at the child and go, "You like wearing clothes?" And she's never said that, but she does have my personality, so she may be thinking it. I think she's stuck there till she can steal a car. But do you like wearing clothes? Well, yeah. Well, where do you think that money comes from for you wearing clothes? All these things come from something else. And so when we look at the arrogance that is amongst America, you look at over with Europe, you look at around the world, there is a built-in complacency to the things of God, and that complacency leads to arrogance. Because as we begin doing with our own hands, you think about it. At one time we talked about childbirth as the blank of childbirth. Starts with an M. Miracle of childbirth. Rarely described us that way anymore, is it? And yet it's still a miraculous event. So, anything else before we drive on from here? So he's going to wipe out the elders, the honorable man, the prophet that teaches falsehood. These guys are gone. This represents the leadership of Israel. These cats have been leading the folks astray. They're the ones that are stirring the pot, and they're the ones that are enticing the enemies to attack Judah. It is.
Churches are getting more liberal in their theology, and I think that's really where the downfall starts with America, is that we have allowed the church to be
Duke University is going to allow Islamic prayers from the chapel steeple. Duke University was a Methodist and Quaker seminary. Yeah, now it's just a cemetery, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, even closer, was a very conservative
Yes, she was.
pastor, and Baylor University Truett Seminary is a very, they call themselves modern.
Oh, they're liberal.
Very liberal
Yep.
college, and he would go over his studies.
George W. Truett was the, I think, the first pastor of the First Baptist Dallas. George W. Truett refinanced a massive debt of the Southern Baptists in the 1920s when Baptists owed millions of dollars to creditors by the signature of his good name. George W. Truett, with B.H. Carroll, founded Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And when Southern Baptists told Baylor, hey, thanks for playing, but you can't stay, and out they went, they named their seminary after probably one of the most conservative Baptist preachers you could name it after to teach liberal theology. So it's kind of like... So George W. Truett is probably going, please quit defaming my name. Please, please stop. Yeah, that too. No, but they have a seminary. And I know some guys that are there. Some of the professors that I studied with left Southwestern and went to Truett, and they held to some very liberal ideas, and we go round and round in class, and we chase each other around, and not literally chase each other around, but chase around in class, and it was good because education-wise, I got to see through the window to the other side, which is an advantage. A lot of kids come up through colleges here, and then they go, well, I'll go to Baylor. They got a seminary right up the road instead of going to Fort Worth and thinking that it's a conservative seminary because it's named after a conservative, and kind of find out that it's not. But by that time, it's too late because it's kind of like a bait and switch. So let's take a look. Picking up 16 on the next page. For those who guide this people are leading them astray. That's why he's wiping them out. And those who guide them are brought to confusion. Therefore the Lord does not take pleasure in their young men, nor does he have pity on their orphans or their widows, for every one of them is godless and an evildoer. Now he's talking about the 10 northern tribes. You flip up the other one, man. Just leave the side by side up there. You're good. There you go. Because then when I look up, I can see both. Now notice what he says. Not only am I cutting off your old men, your wise men, not only am I cutting off the prophet, but your young men I will have no pity on. Your women and children I will have no pity on. Why? Every one of them is guilty. So when God's judgment comes on a people, it comes on the totality of the people for the acts of the whole. Not is everybody in Israel a pagan? No. Is every one of them not fearing God? No. But here's the thing. This happens in Jerusalem when Nebuchadnezzar comes through. There were good, godly Jews in Jerusalem. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Good, godly men. But God punished that nation and took a lot of them out. The remnant is the one that is going to be spared. They seem like they get disciplined, but they're the ones that get spared. Jerusalem gets destroyed. They take the brunt of the desolation. So God's judgment comes upon a people even if there's a handful. Why? Because there's a warning there. And these are his people. This is another name for him is Ephraim. We'll see where Ephraim and Manasseh are used together here in a little bit. This is the 10 tribes. Now Walter and I had a discussion a while back about how many good kings came out of the north? How many good kings were in the northern tribe? None, not a single one. They were 0 for 19. That's a pretty poor batting right here, isn't it? Not a one was good. Judah fared slightly better. They were 50-50. They were 9 for 9. 9 good kings, 9 bad kings. So.
Well, God didn't want them to have no king but him.
That's right.
In the first place, and that was, again, the arrogance of thinking they could do it with a king with a golden crown.
We want a king like all the other nations. But you have a king. Yeah, we want one we can see. So let's pick us up and go a little bit further here. The Lord does not. I read that evildoer. Every mouth speaking foolishness. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away, and his hand is still stretched out. In spite of all this, it's here. It's right here. My anger is angry. I'm right here. And in spite of all this, I haven't hit you yet, but I'm about ready to bring a whooping. For the wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns and even sets the thickets of the forest aflame. They roll upward in a column of smoke, but the fury of the Lord of hosts, the land is burned up, and the people are like fuel before the fire. No man spares his brother. It's an every man for himself environment. I was at the store yesterday, and apparently lines don't mean that there are people waiting to see someone. Lines are to be bypassed by someone with far more urgent means than everybody else that's standing in line. But you don't understand. I'll only be here for a second. You don't understand. We are all here for a second. And a second longer than you were. So back to the back of the line. Yeah. Yeah. I'm for saying a lot of things. Anyhow.
The benefit of lines is they're not going to leave the line.
That's right.
And if you want to talk to them about church, you can get them in the line because they're not going anywhere.
That's right. And so you have this. Look at the depravity. I'll build what God knocks down. I'll build better. We follow the teachings of these people because they're wiser than us.
Things don't change.
They don't. There's nothing new under the sun. Solomon was not lying when he said there is nothing new under the sun. Folks, this is a cyclic behavior that you see with kid to parent, adult to area in which they live, families, nations, states, local government. It is the same. It doesn't change. You go back through world history. When our church history videos, you saw where people, when they rose to power within the Catholic Church, grabbed the power, held onto it with both hands, and then exploited the sheep for personal gain. And then we're shocked when it all came crashing down. What? Right? It's kind of like when criminals get caught, they have this bewildered look on their face like, how'd you know?
Because they think they are going to escape the wrath of the government just as we as humans think we'll escape the wrath of God.
Oh, exactly.
Even though He tells us we will not, we don't believe it.
Hey, watch little kids. They're pretty narcissistic, are they not? They are the world, and you are here to support them. And if you don't curb that early on, what do you raise? You got it. And you see folks like that out at the store, and you see folks like that out in the street, and you see folks like that get on TV that have an entitlement mindset. And it's not one race over another. Look, we have generations across all racial divides that have an entitlement mindset. I'm owed it because Europeans hate Americans. They do, because we show up and we go, we're an American. Yeah, we kind of figured out by your driving. I remember one time I was driving through a little town. I was going to Asiago, and I went through the town, and for somehow you could go through the town going up, but on the way back you were supposed to go around the town. It was snowing, and I missed the sign. And so here I am, driving right through the town where everybody would normally walk. And here I am driving my car through, and you're all waving at me to stop, and I go, it's all right, in my best American. And you hear them all, like, stupito americano, idioto, idioto. Oh, it's all right, I'm an American. They look at us, and they go, ay. Because we have a bit of a swagger and a bit of an arrogance with us when we go overseas. And they look at that and they see it that way. But worse than that, it's an entitlement mindset that says we are entitled and there is nothing that God can do to stop this. Folks, that's a dangerous thing when the created looks at the Creator and says, I need you not. That is a dangerous thing. Because then the Creator, where are we at time-wise? Where's Mickey's hand? Because like I said, I left my... Oh, we got plenty of time. Yeah, still got an hour. I keep going. That's a dangerous thing. And these people are tiptoeing on the edge. Notice, you see the warning. My hand is outstretched. I hadn't hit you yet, but it's coming. Billy Sunday had a sermon called Payday Someday. Payday's coming. And it ain't going to be a pretty payday. Let's take a look here. They slice off what is on their right hand, but still are hungry. And they eat what is on their left hand, but are not satisfied. And each of them eats his own flesh of his own arm. Now, this is kind of a violent depiction. Now, in the ancient world, right and left, when you see this in a passage, he knows not his right hand from his left hand. This is legal argumentation that the man is outside his wits. He's so depraved in his mindset that he cannot tell that going to the right is bad or going to the left is bad or going straight is good. They do not possess the sense to now distinguish between right and wrong. And so they are slicing and dicing each other up, and they are consuming one another. Not literally in a cannibalistic way, but literally as you see today. We've got folks today that prey upon each other. We have folks over in, Nigeria, that have kidnapped people from their own country. They just don't believe the same way they do, and have sold them as slaves. We thought we've wiped that out centuries ago. No, it still keeps going. There's such depravity. They do not see the depth of it, and they cannot care. They just don't care. They like life as it is. Manasseh devours Ephraim. Ephraim devours Manasseh. Now, oddly enough, he mentions these two individuals. By the way, are these two the original 12, or are they Joseph's children? There's Joseph's children. Ephraim is one of the original 12 because of Joseph. Because from Joseph it goes, he passes it on. But Manasseh, God gives Joseph a double portion. These are Joseph's children. Brothers. That are usually designed to represent the totality of the northern kingdom. The two that represent the northern kingdom that happen to be brothers are about devouring one another.
And they are half Egyptian.
Joseph's wife was a priestess.
Yeah, that'd be true. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so they're devouring one another. And they should know better. They've seen in the tragedy of their own father what happens when brothers dislike each other. That's where they come from. As you're right. And so you have that story of Joseph being sold by his brothers out of envy because of his arrogance into slavery. And they now come up out of Egypt as landed tribes. And they're the ones that they mention are consuming one another. I don't think that's an accident. There are 8 other brothers he could have chosen. In spite of all this, his anger, this big God, does not turn away. And his hand is still stretched out. In spite of all this, I have not fully released my anger. And in spite of all this, I still have not released the power of my hand. Interesting. We'll switch over to 10. Woe to those who enact evil statutes, to those who constantly record unjust decisions, so as to deprive the needy of justice, to rob the poor of my people of their rights, so that the widow may be their spoil, that they may plunder the orphans. Now, what will you do in the day of punishment and in devastation which will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help? And where will you leave your wealth? Nothing remains but to crouch among the captives or fall among the slain. You have enacted laws that have exploited the people. You have done things in the name of power of a king or in nobility to exploit people underneath you. You have enacted evil statutes. You have a constant recorded unjust decisions. You have deprived the needy of justice. Does this sound like moral people? Does this sound like the people of God? And folks, we got folks in the church, not here, but in the church universal, that have a Sunday faith and a Monday through Friday business mentality. And they exploit people constantly. I have only worked in the business world, not in ministry, but in the business world, I've only worked for one believer I'd ever work for again. Most of them I wouldn't work for. I'd rather work for a pagan. I'll be honest with you. They'll at least treat me fair. They'll at least treat me fair. Because what happens is the person gets so focused on money that they go, well, you know, brother, it ought to be, you ought to be doing it because we're both brothers in Christ. Well, I'd like to at least get paid somewhat of what my value is worth. Oh, yeah, I will when things are, you stick with me and we'll take it. And the guy would never do that. But he seemed to be able to increase his holdings. And it's not that, hey, look, that the guy's the owner of the business, he gets the better cut of the share, but you should pay your people honestly. And he wasn't. And I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen in the military. Look, I'd rather work for a pagan boss in the military at times than work for a godly commander. The ones I've worked with, most of them were godly on Sunday and not godly during the week. And that's an issue. That's a huge issue. Because you say one thing with your mouth and do another thing with your action. These individuals, though, weren't even having the facade of being godly. They were just whatever they wanted. But notice what it says here. Now, what will you do in that day of punishment? And in the devastation which will come from afar, Assyria, to whom will you flee for help? Have you ever watched people that when judgment comes, all of a sudden, that's when they get super holy? You ever notice that? The weekend before we pushed out of Iraq, and this was after we had gone to stabilization operations, which means there was still some shooting and a lot of things going on, but there wasn't the initial push like in the first OIF. I had record attendance from my battalion in chapel that morning. Basic training chaplain. I have pictures of me standing in the middle of a chapel. That's probably seat about 300, about the same number as this, and I am in a sea of gray. And I had the kids up on the stage and back in the whatever it's called back there. They didn't call it the foyer, but well, we call it a foyer, but because the Anglicans had control of that building, they called it something else. I had them all back there, and I'm in a sea of gray. It was. I mean, that will get your ego pumped up considerably, because man, you're the greatest thing going, because all these kids are here. Now, to be realistic, they were all there because that was a safe. Yeah, you got it in a heartbeat. And they were standing room outside, Brother Abby. It did.
Now every GI I know has a cell phone, but he had no way of calling him.
Yep.
He wouldn't let him call. And there he sat, ready to deploy.
Yep.
And people who were civilians were in church praying.
Yep. And see, back in the chapel, these kids were there. They needed Jesus for 9.5 weeks.
The rotation.
The Sunday right before graduation, I had 100 kids. Because they were done needing Jesus. They made it through basic training. Jesus held up to his side of the bargain. They held up to theirs. They went for 9 weeks. They didn't need Jesus on the 10th week. You ever notice that? When people hit bottom and God says, where are you going to go now? They look and go, to you, please. That's what he says. Where will you hide your wealth? All this ill-gotten gain that you have taken from the people you have stolen, all this undesired gain that you have taken from the people through exploiting your people, you think it's going to save you when the Assyrians come? No, it's not. The Assyrians were ruthless. Extremely ruthless. Ashurbanipal was known for filleting people's skin off their spine while they were alive. For giggles. For giggles. Well, this sounds like fun. I think I'll just fillet you while you're alive. He would bury people up to their necks in sand, and then he would take his chariot and play polo. For giggles. Because he could. Because he was the most powerful man in the world, and it's not good to be the king. And if you're not the king, you could be a polo mallet, or a hen, or a ball. Every so often, one of them would make mile markers to himself by, he would stop, he would get out, he'd behead a certain number of people, and he would stack their heads up in a nice little pile. And it did two things. One, it told him where he had been, and two, it told everybody in that region, do not mess with me. I will not play nicely when I come back. When they destroy a culture, they uproot the people from one culture and they plant them in another part of the world, and they grab people from all over and they plant them where they took them from, to where there is no commonality of language, there's no commonality of religion, there's no commonality against the Assyrians, and therefore they cannot rise up against them. They do a number on the 10 northern tribes, essentially, basically wiping them out. And they don't have to butcher them to do it. Where are you going to run? Is that wealth going to help you? That ability to build nicely hewn stone walls, is that going to help? This is the situation that they are in. This is this prophecy going to them. But Ahaz in the south is maybe not aware of this per se, but I would think that he probably is, because it's the same prophet talking to him. In spite of all this, his anger does not turn away. And his hand is still stretched out.
When God really wants us to know something, He tells us a lot of times.
He does.
In the same words, and you see those words over and over and over.
This phrase repeats itself. I think this is the last time it's repeated between now and 19. Yeah, it is. But how many times has it been repeated? It's been repeated a lot. Yep. And it's there, one, for the reader to read and go, oh, that's what you meant. Yeah, an aha moment when you've realized that you have walked into an ambush that you thought that it wasn't an ambush, and then you realize that what's for dinner and what's on the table is you. And you think that you're going to go carve somebody else up. And it dawns on you, oh, a cold wind. And crickets. That's what's happening. That's what this statement is designed to elicit. And you know what happens? They don't do nothing. And he wipes them out. 15 minutes, we'll look at Assyria and we'll be done. Woe to Assyria. Now, why? The Assyrians are going to be utilized by God to punish the 10 northern tribes for this arrogance. See, God sometimes uses people we don't like and don't like us to beat up on us. To get us to go, hey, I think God's trying to get our attention somehow. Right? We're a little slow, like Forrest Gump. Shrimp gumbo, shrimp tartare, shrimp done, shrimp. Right? Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, and the staff, in whose hands is my indignation. My hand hadn't been stretched out, it is now. You are the rod, you are the staff that is coming in my hand. I send it against a godless nation and commission it against the people of my fury to capture booty and seize plunder and trample them down like mud in the streets. This isn't a pretty description. This is a totality of war against God's own people. The people he said, you are my people. I am sending them to trample you down like mud, to seize and plunder you. These people are commissioned against you by me. Yet, it does not so intend, nor does it plan so in its heart, but rather its purpose is to destroy and to cut off many nations, for saying, are not all my princes kings? This is the Assyrians talking. So, as a rod of God's instrument, or an instrument of God's punishment, even the Assyrians look and go, our princes, they're kings. We all know what we are. We're the baddest dudes on the block. Do you see how the level of arrogance doesn't change? Except that one people should know better and the other do not. And so the rod in which God is going to utilize to crush is just as arrogant. Just as cruel. Actually, far more cruel. Watch this. It's not Cano like Carchemish, Hamath like Aparad, Samaria like Damascus. As my hand has reached out to the kingdoms of the idols, whose graven images were greater than those of Jerusalem, Samaria, shall I not do to Jerusalem and her images just as I've done to Samaria and her idols? I've reached out and crushed other nations. I've destroyed their strongholds. And I'll do the same to Jerusalem. Not so fast, Sennacherib, because you get wiped out in 722 outside of Jerusalem when Hezekiah is there. So it will be when the Lord has completed all his work on Mount Zion, on Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the fruits of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the promptness of his haughtiness. For he has said, by the power of my hand and by my wisdom I did this. For I have understanding, and I have removed the boundaries of all the peoples and plundered their treasures, and like a mighty man have brought down their inhabitants. This guy's thinks that pretty highly of himself too, doesn't he? Notice what it says. So be the Lord has not completed his work. He says, I will punish the fruits of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria. Remember, Ahaz has a prophecy about a young boy that is going to be there to protect Israel. Hezekiah will see the Assyrians come and lay siege to Jerusalem, and they will lay siege, and I think they destroy Lachish when they do it, and a few other places. And yet, their army encamped outside of Jerusalem is wiped out in one night. God provides for Jerusalem. Assyria believes that they have the power to continue and take Jerusalem, the two remaining landed tribes, the three tribes left. And God says, oh no. No, no. My hand has reached into the riches of the peoples like a nest, and gather the abandoned eggs. I gather all of the earth. There is not one that flaps his wings or opened his beak or chirped. That's the arrogance of the Assyrians. We are powerful when we've crushed the people of God. Notice what it said next. Is the axe to boast over the one who chops with it? I find this statement hilarious. Is the saw to exalt itself over the one who wields it? That would be like the club wielding those who lift it. Or like the rod lifting him who is not wood. Can the axe claim that it chopped the wood? The person swinging the axe gets the credit for using the axe, does it not? Does the saw cut without someone running it? Does the club swing on its own? Notice that God said, I will commission these people to do this for me. Therefore, your actions are done by my will, and you will not come to Jerusalem and sack it like you think. You think you're so arrogant in your power? Look what I had you do to the 10 tribes north, and you believe that because you were the instrument that you had the power? See how the arrogance continues? Folks, just because we're the instrument of something does not mean that we possess the power to do the thing. 2 condemnations. One against the 10 northern tribes. One against the people God uses against them. And the charge against both of them is what? Arrogance. Supreme arrogance. To look at the Creator and say, hey, what you knock over? We put better stones up than we had. When you're helping us out, we call this city renewal. You can go ahead, knock away, God. Do your worst. And then the instrument of destruction that he brings looks at him and says, we may be the axe, but we swing ourselves. I might be the saw, but man, when I cut by my own power. Kimmy and I like to play rough. She looks at me on the floor. She goes, okay, Daddy, let's play rough. I say, okay. She goes, now lay down on the ground on your back and get ready. She's going to beat me up and tells me that. I'm going to beat you up. Okay. Let me lay down in a defenseless position so you can have a chance. And then after she comes, I tickle her and she runs away screaming. God doesn't tickle these people. He wipes them out. Therefore, the Lord God of hosts will send a wasting disease amongst your stout warriors. Under the glory, a fire will be kindled like a burning flame, and the light of Israel will become a fire, and the Holy One a flame, and it will burn and devour his thorns and his briars in a single day. He will destroy the glory of the forest and the fruit of his garden, both soul and body, and it will be as when the sick man wastes away, and the rest of the trees of his forest will be so small in number that a child could write them down. Sennacherib moves his army in, lays siege to Jerusalem. Nehemiah is terrified, and one night the angel of the Lord comes through and obliterates his army. Sennacherib leaves the train. The wealth that he has conquered in the 10 northern tribe, leaves it and runs. It's one of the last times Assyria was really a dominant power. From 722 on, they begin to wane in power. In 611, they are run out of Nineveh. Matter of fact, Nineveh is so destroyed by the Babylonians that when Alexander the Great comes through, he has to ask the inhabitants, what's this city? And they don't know. So thoroughly destroyed it was. In 609, they're defeated at the Battle of Carchemish, and Assyria disappears. They're gone. But we're the axe. Yeah. For a purpose. You're a tool that I used, and now I no longer need you. Pride and arrogance. This is going to lead up to chapter 11, where we will see that it gets pulled forward a lot into the New Testament. And so I wanted to cover this ground because there's a lot of things going on. You have a dual prophecy going on. You have what is going on in Isaiah's day. A lot of this is going on in Isaiah's day. But there are glimpses that you see the New Testament writers pull forward that are going to talk about the coming Christ and Christ coming again that is still going to be utilized for Isaiah's day. And so it has a dual track in what's going on. And a lot of times we either like to force it one way or the other because it sounds like we can't be committed on one or the other. And so what you have here is a dual fulfilling prophecy, one in Isaiah's day and one in the New Testament. And it's amazing that God makes this train drive that way because it wasn't by accident. Questions? We've got a few minutes. It is.
Writings that he did as alive today for our time as they were in his time.
Oh, absolutely.
And before everyone's time.
Yes, and here's the thing. I think when we look at this passage, we can look at our nation and take warning from what the 10 northern tribes had done and the behavior in which they had, and so that God did not spare His own people in that day. He will not spare His people when they apostatize in another age. And you see this throughout the history of Europe and throughout the history as the church moves forward. When it begins to apostatize, God doesn't spare them. And so there's a lot of things that you see, and we can draw a lot of principles. And that's why a lot of people go, well, you know, we shouldn't preach out of the Old Testament because it was written to the Jews. And it is. But there's a lot of great principle we can pull forward for discipleship. Folks, when we when we get to a level of arrogance, when we can look at the Creator and say, I no longer need you. No matter what you do. Remember the old song, anything you can do, I can do better. And you say that to God, you are slowly enjoying the last few breaths of your life.
Well, he's just like the mom standing in the movie line where two little kids fighting, and she says, you don't behave, I'm going to take you home. But He will take us home.
He will.
We don't behave enough.
He will. And so we have this going on. And you see that in this imagery, you have wicked children that He uses a wicked thing to whip us with. And then that wicked thing assumes it's got power it doesn't have. And you see all along, all these events were not orchestrated by God. God chose Assyria. God sent Assyria. When Assyria thought that it was going to do more than it could, God said, you're a tool. I'm the guy that swings the tool. And I'm done swinging you. And I'm going to destroy you. And He does. I'm going to send something to waste you away. And they waste away. Over 100 years, they waste away into oblivion. It's an amazing thing. Any other questions? No, we'll close this out with prayer if there's not. Okay. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank You for this day and this opportunity to come before You and look at the text of Isaiah. And the warning this passage has to believers today, to nations today, to our nation today. That when the people of God so abandon His cause, so abandon His word, to believe that their right hand is mightier than yours, we grow towards trouble. And we grow towards danger. For we are but tools in Your hand. We are the thing created, not the Creator. We are the instrument. And for us to assume that we can take the role of Creator is a height of arrogance. Forgive us for our arrogance. Forgive us for our sin. Help us as a people to see the depravity within our lives. To return back to God. To return back to You. To the changing work of Jesus Christ, Your Son. We ask for Your forgiveness upon us and upon our nation, and we ask for Your blessing upon us as we leave here, that we take this life-changing message of hope to a hurting and dying world. We ask these things in Your name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, I'm going to